Muslims, and even if the Jew hide behind a tree, the tree or stone, the tree or stone will say, "Oh, Muslim servant of God, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and get him." And say, that exactly explains the Palestinian violence, the Arab violence, not resistant violence. I said, this is not because the Hadith instigates them. You know what the word of Hadith speak of? Okay, let me take a very simple example to you, for those who are familiar with the Bible. Have you heard of it, Armageddon? What does it say? That before the end of time, what will happen? There will be a big fight, bloodshed. If I say to a Christian, for example, hey, your Bible instigates violence against non-Christian. He says, God forbid, why? I said, well, in Armageddon, it said there will be bloodshed, so that instigates you to commit violence. I think you would be entitled to say, but wait a minute, this is a prophecy. It didn't say, take your sword and start the killing. It said that God will, that something like that will happen. So it's a prophecy of something that's going to happen in the future. Not that it is desirable, not that you should do it, but it is God telling us something will happen in the future. Secondly, more than one version of that hadith say what? And that would settle the issue and show that absolutely nothing to do with Jews or being non-Muslims. Had nothing to do except with the same consistent principles that we spoke about, that you're not allowed to fight or wage war except for bona fide self-defense, if peaceful means fair, or to resist severe oppression. We'd put it to rest. The hadith actually says, يُقَاتِلُكُمُ الْيَهُودِ, that before of the Day of Judgment, Jews, and by the way, notice here, Jews does not mean all Jews. Like I say, I spoke in Memorial University to the student and faculty. I didn't speak to the student and faculty for the whole world, for all times. It is a subset. That's a well-known rule in the interpretation of the Quran. Not always it's inclusive for everyone. There are limiting applications, which means some Jews will wage fight against Muslims. What does that call in the Islamic teaching about defense? Unprovoked aggression, without justification. فَيُسَلِّطُكُمُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِمْ. So they will wage war against you, attack you. So God will send you to fight against them, and then hadith continue. That only in the case of aggression, which is permissible under every law, including our own international law these days. Similarly, some people also say, but there is a hadith of the Prophet that says, I have been commanded to fight against, again, quote unquote, people until they bear testimony that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger and all of that. And they fail to understand again that hadith must be interpreted in the light of the Quran. There are preponderance of evidence that we spoke about tonight preclude the notion of fighting people because they are not believers. The hadith has been understood by many scholars to refer to people that this is the ghaya. It is not that you have to fight and the only way to stop if they believe in Islam. This is an erroneous understanding. But it means that those people are fighting Muslims in the first place, not because Muslims did any wrong to them, but because of their hatred of Islam, unwillingness to listen to the message of Islam that will be good for them. Which means then that even those who are at war with you, legitimate war, to repel aggression or oppression, after all, if they accept Islam, the very reason behind war or fighting between you and them will no longer be there. Not that you have to fight because the Quran says clearly, let be no compulsion in religion. I run very quickly, very, very quickly about what I call the broad picture without elaboration, that one must understand not only the various verses in one topic and hadith relating to them, but one must relate it to the whole approach of Islam. To start with, Islam didn't come from for conflict or bloodshed or unnecessary violence. The root of Islam, again, like we said, the root of jihad, the root of kufr, Islam also comes from three letters, SLM, actually, which means, I didn't write it here, but the root from which Islam comes is SLM, which means submission. It means also peace. Actually, the way I define it, Islam is to seek peace with God, inner peace, and peace with the creation of God, whether humans, animals, vegetation, ecology, through submission to God and acceptance of His guidance for our earthly journey here in this life. The many key terms in Islam, eschatological and theological terms, like one of the attributes of God, paradise, all come from the same term, the abode of peace. The 5 basic objectives of Islamic Sharia to protect faith, life, mind, honor, and property is basically predicated on peace as well. If you look at the relational values in the Quran, how Muslims should relate to others. First, no compulsion in religion. There is no argument about that. It's clear in the Quran. There are so many verses in the Quran that also establish the freedom of expression and religion. If you're interested in that, I have given a paper recently in Sweden in a conference called Freedom of Religion and Freedom of Faith, Building Bridges. And I included a variety of verses in the Quran that again carry the same meaning, that you're free. Even if I consider your belief false, you have every right to do it. I'm not God here to hold you accountable. God will hold us all accountable in the day of judgment. I have to treat you, as the Quran says, in kindness and justice if you're peacefully coexisting. Peaceful and gentle dialogue is there in the Quran. I mentioned earlier, chapter 29, talking to people of the book and finding common ground, like believing God and revelation, seeking common ground with all, in particular the Abrahamic religion, as it's normally has been called, people who claim to be descendants of Abraham physically and or spiritually. This is in essence what we can conclude, that we really need to do some more homework before we can just jump to conclusion, in order to be critical in assessing what the media and pseudo academic writings are filling the market with hundreds, literally, or if not thousands of volumes, all in the wrong direction. I thank you very much for your good listening.
We have, I think, we'll take questions. And please, everyone, try to concentrate on the topic and in a very friendly environment. If whoever wants to write the questions on papers, actually we have forms of papers.
Or you can ask orally if you like.
If you want to ask for it.
On this topic or others, I mean, it's open.
Okay.
I have a question. It's not directly related, but it's about Islam and backwardness. Like, if we look at the map now, we find that most of the Muslim countries, unfortunately, they are backward. Like developing countries, experiencing poverty, like, ignorance, high rate of illiteracy. Why is that? Is there any reason, like in Islam, that's causing this?
2 points. On the issue of methodology, we have to make a clear distinction between Islam and Muslim. Islam is perfect because it is what God designed for human being, and God has the ultimate wisdom. Muslims as people are not perfect. They have their faults and they have their problems, and that cuts across all religions. Muslims is not identical to Islam. Christians is not identical to Christianity. Judaism is not identical to Islam. Can we agree on that? People are humans. Second, when we try to assess even the impact of religion on people, even though it could be their fault and their shortcoming, at what point of time are we looking? Whether the history of Islam or history of the West. Take the history of the West. Has the West always been on top? How about the centuries of so-called Dark Ages? It is only after the decline of the Muslim civilization and emergence, of the Industrial Revolution and so on in Europe, that Europe became prominent. So even if you take Europe, or West as we call it today, it hasn't always been like that. There have been ups and downs. By the same token, at what point are we evaluating even Muslims, even though, like I say, they are imperfect? We're choosing the period of time of decline. Has it always been like that? It hasn't. If you look at the history of civilization, even though sometimes it hasn't been as fairly covered, there is ample and increasing recognition by Western historians that had it not been for the immense contribution of science and all discipline actually of pursuit of knowledge of Muslims, Western civilization would have not risen or would have been delayed by centuries. There are many who recognize that now. There was one time where the Muslim cities were the largest in the world. They had the most advancement in all areas of knowledge. Are we to be biased and say, no, true Islam was only in that period, and now again, there's no Islam today, or Islam is not capable? It was capable, but the difference here is this, that some people advanced and progressed by rejecting religion. In the case of Islam, it was the reverse. Before the emergence of Islam in the 7th century, the Arabs were zero on the left-hand side, like saying, the Arabs say, zero al-shimal, safra al-shimal. They were nothing. They were good in some poetry and literature and so on, but advancement in terms of knowledge, they were no rivals at all to the either Sassanid Empire to the east or Byzantine Empire in the west. It is because of the emergence of Islam and the constant Quranic exhortation to understand, to demand evidence, to use your mind, to explore the universe. Of course, spirituality, you may not be able to make it experimental, but in area of pursuit, the Quran speaks a lot about that. If you're interested in that, by the way, I can email you. Just email me, Jamal Badawi, one word, at Hotmail. I have a paper that was presented in several conferences called Muslim Contribution to Civilization, its conceptual foundation and historical manifestation. I believe you can find it also if you go to islamonline.net, Muslim Contribution to Civilization. So the Quran itself was encouraging and inciting people to understand. They came on top, and their civilization continued for almost 1,000 years, but many historians, even Western historians, they say that for 650 years, Muslims were the prominent or among the most prominent contributor to all areas of knowledge. So the evidence is there. So how can we see the connection? When Muslims deviated from the teaching of their faith, they got so engrossed in luxury and this and that, violated their teaching, then they went down. So actually Islam was a force of uplifting, not the downward, unless one only paid lip service to the faith. It seems that moderator is not here, so I'll just replace him now.
I didn't understand your question when you said there was negativity towards the Palestinian resistance and the link to Islam. I didn't catch your comment.
No,
on that.
what I say.
Palestine is a land for Muslims and Christians as well. They're also undermined in the same
absolutely.
land.
Absolutely. Actually, I've heard various lectures given even by Christians who say that they have the same kind of oppression, they have the same kind of lack of access to their holy places. And I heard lecture from Jews also, even Israeli Jews, who have conscience and are condemning in no uncertain terms the brutality of the treatments of Palestinians. All I was saying that we should not take the current event and the current oppression and conflict, because it's not a conflict really between Judaism as such and Islam or Christianity. It is a conflict with a political ideology, Zionism, which is hiding behind Judaism, to the point that anyone now who criticizes even the policy of the Israeli government is automatically with the sword of anti-Semitic, anti-Semitic. So I am saying that these legitimate concerns, legitimate grievances that people of Palestine, Muslims and Christians alike, are suffering from is not a religious war in itself, and does not reflect on what the Quran say about still the hope of better relationship once that oppression is removed. And by the way, from my personal observation, more and more Jews are coming now to understand that the propaganda that Jews are masakin, people who are just want to live in this land, but those Palestinian terrorists and violence and the Arabs are just out to throw them in the sea. Many people are now waking up to the fact that this is nothing but deceptive type of propaganda. So all I'm saying as a person interested in religious studies, not politics, I follow what happened in politics, I'm simply religiously speaking for me as a Muslim. I can see, and I give you a reference from the Quran, that there is a good possibility, once this issue of Palestine is resolved in a fair manner, not peace, because the other side of peace is justice. There is no lasting, sustained, and sustainable peace without doing justice. Otherwise, it would collapse again. If that happens, I do not rule the possibility of repetition of the times where Muslim, Christians, and Jews were working together in cordiality in spite of their differences. The Quran itself, you know what it says? عسى الله أن يجعل بينكم وبين الذين عاديتم منهم مودة. It could be, he was talking about the case of in conflict at the time. It says it may be that Allah will make between your hearts and those with enmity to you mawadda, and mawadda is more than love even, it's an intensive form of that. So all I want to say that I want to leave the door open, acknowledge injustices, acknowledge the necessity of removal of those injustices, but not to be tempted because of my sympathy with the persecuted Palestinian to say Jews are always against Muslims, they're the worst enemy. I was just trying to explain that the ayah should not be interpreted just because of the events in a century or less than a century.
We'll try to take questions from some people like to write a question. Some of you will probably could just voice the question if you want. Can a Muslim man marry a non-practicing Christian or Jew?
You see, the question of practice is subjective. To what extent you practice, she must be a believing. In other words, if a person comes from a Jewish background or Christian background, if a woman comes from that background, but she's an atheist, it doesn't matter. Because here what is meant, people of the book, meaning those who believe. Whatever with difference we have with them, but at least she should be a believer in her faith. Because both Judaism and Christianity are predicated in essence on believing in the one God. Believing in the one God.
Any question from the floor? We'll take the next one. Can you talk about the invitation of Islam made by our Prophet, peace be upon him, to the kings of his time? Were the kings forced to accept Islam?
Nobody was forced to accept Islam, number one, because the Quran prohibited. Number two, the Quran indicates that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the role model of implementing the Quran. Number three, that his contemporaries admitted that his wife Aisha, when she was asked about the character of the Prophet, she said his character was the Quran. Fourthly, logically speaking, the Prophet would not have that much love of Muslims and trust of his contemporary, who knew him very closely, if he was reciting the Quran and acting against the teaching of the Quran that prohibits forcing people into faith. The Prophet simply sent letters to the leaders of the nations at that time, inviting them to Islam. Some of them did not accept Islam, but did not show any hostility. Some of them were so rude and made threats that must be taken seriously, like the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, who wrote a letter. First of all, he tore the letter of the Prophet, and then wrote to his local governor by the name of Bazan in Yemen, says there is an Arab there who rose claiming to be a prophet, and he wrote me a letter. Does he dare write to me, and he's my slave servant? Go and ask him to recant, or else bring me his head. That's not an empty threat, and you know how powerful and ruthless these empires were. There are those who killed the messenger of the Prophet. In international law today, when a country kills the ambassador of another country, is it just one person killed? That's an act of war, isn't it? He represents the country, and killing, that's actually an expression of hostility. It is those empires and their tyranny and their behavior that actually led to the fight against them, but it is not to force anyone on Islam or not Islam. Actually, Islam spread only by peaceful means. And the armies did not go and use the arms, at least to my knowledge, to say you accept Islam or I chop off your head. The army fought the aggressive armies until there was peace, and Muslims had some kind of role to play, even though they left lots of autonomy to people, as John Esposito admits. Autonomy was left to people, but at least Muslims protected their backs, since there was no United Nations. If United Nations is good for many, and the Security Council and all these and international treaties, they had to protect themselves in a word of the 7th century. But Islam began to spread. That is not a partisan statement. Read a statement of a famous former missionary, Christian missionary in India, Sir Thomas Arnold, in his book Preaching of Islam, where he surveys the spread of, even though he's, like I say, a missionary himself, so there might be some biases there. But he traces the spread of Islam in a variety of areas in Asia and Africa, in the archipelago, the Philippines and all of this. And you know what he concludes? Basically, read his book. Of course, he did not say Muslim were angels, which I agree with him. There were periods of intolerance, but these were passing things. But he concludes that there are two major reasons for the spread of Islam. Anyone remember or read his book? Number one, trade. Number two, the Sufis, mystical people who focus on spiritual purification and go carrying the message of love and service to people, just like good missionaries, not missionaries with agenda. Here's a loaf of bread and the Bible in the other hand. That's not among good Christians. Among good Christians. These are the two reasons. Merchant going to Africa, going to Asia, and people noticing their brave behavior. They see them cleaning themselves. And they stand in prayer. Who are you praying to? And that began the conversation. And they saw in their honesty, in their commercial dealing, a good role model. And that's a message for Muslims today. If Muslims indeed in the world today are living by Islam, not just talking about Islam, their role model without saying a word would make them like a magnet. People will come and ask him, what's your belief? And maybe some people might agree or disagree, fine. But like I say, I'm not defending each and every Muslim. I'm saying religiously it doesn't have a base. The normative period of the Prophet, there is nothing like that. The Sahaba, the four rightly guided caliph, the first 30 years were following again what the Prophet started. If some people behind that, or in later ages, wanted to build empires, or like in Spain, everybody wants to have his fiefdom, that was the actually reason for their fall. But that's not Islamic.
More interest on the war system in Islam. And any questions from the floor? Looks like I'm asking all the questions here. This is what exactly is the origin of the word infidel?
Like I said, it's in English. It means someone who doesn't have a religion, doesn't believe in God, but it was used also in medieval times to refer to Muslims with this propaganda that Muslims are worshippers of idols and they are doing this and that, and we have to save the land of Jesus from those infidels. It has nothing to do with Islam as a term or concept. In Arabic it says, thank you for this lecture. What is the solution today about Muslim fighting with a technology that they don't have? Should they respond or wait? Well, the ayah in the Quran is very clear. There's nothing swept under the ground. The Quran, in the context of defending yourself, it says, وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. It says, prepare, meaning for those aggressors, or present or potential, whatever power you can master. It could be power of knowledge, it could be power of arms, it could be power of economy. It is a very broad statements made in the Quran. And tell me of any nations today in the world that says, oh, we are so loving to people, we should have good intention, forget about armies, and maybe next time, forget about police, everybody will behave. No, everybody ain't going to behave good. It's a reality of the life. So yes, but of course people have to resist in the best possible way, provided they don't commit aberration. And that's what distinguishes true jihad from acts of terrorism, quote unquote, terrorism properly defined, not politically defined. I define terrorism as a deliberate act of hurting or victimizing the innocent, whether the victim or the culprit is an individual, group, or state. There is state terrorism, and that's not acceptable in Islam. It's the other pole also, and violate the ethics even of the battlefield when there is legitimate cause to go to the battlefield.